Okay, are we ready? All right, I will now call the Estacada Urban Renewal Agency meeting to order. Seeing as I have no citizen and community group comments, we are at the consent agenda, so all of you have had a chance to read over the minutes. So can I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, can I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a first and second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay. Approved. Thank you very much for that. Okay, we are at agency business. So this is pretty much your area, Matt. So I'm just gonna let you start off with the first thing and then we'll bring you in on the second.
Okay.
Okay, so project updates. Past, current, and upcoming.
Go ahead and share screen then, is that right?
Go ahead.
Should we try and get verification?
No,
that
go
we're being
ahead.
Heard first?
Go ahead.
Okay. I gotta.
Hey Denise, while he's pulling it up, where is the packet located when I go through the city website for this? I can't find it. Oh. Okay,
And then you'll see the city, the list, and then it's in the city, the urban renewal. And then the, if there's a, yeah. And then say, you enter.
We use your own laptop.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier.
that's actually a pretty smart idea.
Or if you still have Sadie's email, it's in the
Yeah, I
Wednesday
think
email
it-
she
I
sent.
think I may run into it here. Right? There it is. I think I found it through some roundabout way. There it is, okay. Thank you. Holy cow, that's small.
Okay. Is that? Okay. All right. Good to be back live. So tonight for our meeting, we'll, I think, have ample time, but probably still want to keep moving. And so definitely ask questions as you have them, but just be aware that I'm going to try and pace myself accordingly. I want to do two things tonight. One is to bring you up to speed on projects past, present, and future. And then that kind of segues into Mr. Kerr's grant application, which we'll be talking about second. So in the first quarter of this year, I believe I presented about urban renewal generally, and we talked about just what it is and how it works. So we'll go through this slide really quickly, but at that time we had discussed how it was a sort of a tool in the economic development toolbox, that it's meant to be used to address what statutes call blight, which is basically economically distressed areas that are in need of capital investment in order to sort of bolster the economy in that area. The way that urban renewal is financed is through tax increment finance. And at that time, I showed a little graphic representation that kind of showed pieces of the tax increment going from the normal tax collection into the urban renewal fund. I don't know if that jogs any memories or not, but basically, again, by way of review, when an urban renewal district is formed, that tax base is frozen for just the defined area, which is in your packet, shown in orange. And then for the 20-year lifespan of the urban renewal zone, it's just that frozen base that is collected for that defined area. None of the other taxable entities in Estacada area that would otherwise be taxed are affected. It's only these properties in the area. And each year, as taxes go up or as new investments are made in the zone, that growth in the tax base comes to urban renewal and is used to invest back into the urban renewal area. So our plan was formed in 2007. At that time, there's a plan document that gets done, a full feasibility analysis that forecasts how much debt can be incurred during that 20-year period. And that number is driven by how much revenue this area is going to generate, and therefore how well we can service the debt that we incur. And so as you see on the right there, there's a 20-year lifespan. It expires in 2027. So we have about 5.5 years remaining. And at the time of our plan creation, the maximum indebtedness, and that's a term that's used in statutes and that I'll use again in this presentation, sometimes just referred to with a shorthand MI, was set at $6.6 million. We have roughly 3.04 million remaining to expend before the 27 sunset date. We can not incur any debt past that sunset date, but we can continue to collect TIF until the debt that we've incurred is retired. I guess I left out one small piece to say that this plan document is quite general. It's not very prescriptive when it comes to the exact projects that might be undertaken, but instead kind of paints a picture of broad categories. In 2011, the city secured grant funding and completed the downtown and Riverside area plan, which does give greater specificity to the potential projects that we might take or that we might fund and execute in the urban renewal plan. And then again in 2015, basically, since this is a pretty big menu of options of ways to spend the urban renewal dollars, the 2015 strategic plan really tried to create some priorities for what should be funded first, second, third, and so on in order to make sure that we're using the funds in the best way possible. That 2015 strategic plan document is only about 3 or 4 pages long, and it basically calls for from 2015 to 2020. Yes, we're in 2021 now. We kind of lost a year there. It calls for basically 2 types of projects. There were 5 specific projects, but 2 general categories: grant programs and then improvements to the riverfront / Lakeshore area. As far as grants go, those programs were created by my predecessor in 2015, and then later in 2018, we consolidated those programs to be more effective, I guess, if we're just going to be brief on that topic. To date, we've dispersed or committed, I should say, we have not dispersed that amount. That's slightly incorrect. We've committed 505,000. And those 505,000 have been matched by either partner grants from outside agencies, not the city of Estacada, or private investment for $1.7 million of investment in the zone. So put differently, we're seeing about a 1 to 3.5 ratio for every urban renewal dollar spent in the district. We're seeing private or other grant money come on top of that to complement it. The reason why I distinguish between dispersed and committed is because, for example, the Heritage Project at 344 Southeast Main, which we'll talk about in a second, we've committed those funds, but not dispersed them. We won't disperse them until that building is complete. Here's just a summary of the projects that have been completed through grants. All of these were funded at no less than a 50-50 ratio. So this gives you just a general idea of where the grants have been committed. Trying to think of anything noteworthy to mention here. I don't think so. So that's grant programs in a nutshell. I think they've been quite effective. Again, one of the goals of urban renewal is to try and buoy the tax base and get it to grow, whereas in the past it's either been stagnant or in some cases, taxable assessed values had been falling. So to see $3.50 supplement, $1 of public investment is a good indicator that those grants are working the way they're intended to. So the second category was Lakeshore improvements and water access. So far, we've secured about $110,000 in outside grants from Mount Hood Territory and Oregon State Marine Board. And so far, the Urban Renewal Agency has spent roughly $115,000, and those dollars have gone towards design and permitting. We've secured the services of PBS Engineering to help with those processes. What remains to be completed at this point is to take this project from the 60% permit set of drawings all the way to a biddable and buildable construction set of 100% drawings, and then the actual construction. The project you can see is, see, do I have it in the staff report? I don't think I do. I just have it in this presentation, but you can see that it calls for a series of gangways. This part that you see kind of traveling northwest is a, I guess they call it soft surface trail, which is not necessarily soft. It's probably gravel or like a bark chip type situation. And it has a sort of entry point closer to the community center. And then this circular and sort of snake-like structure you see is a viewpoint, and the stairs kind of wind in that S shape. And that launching point from the street level would be basically at Beach Street or near the Red Fox Motel. The Urban Renewal 2015 plan and our finance plan, which is included in your attachments, calls for an investment of $300,000 total toward the project. So we have a gap to fill before we'll be able to construct the project. And we expect to be able to raise those funds, hopefully through continued grant writing. And then once Wade Creek Park Phase 3 is completed, there will be park SDCs that may be available to help build out the project as well. So with permitting right now, we expect by springtime, we will have permits in hand. We'll probably need to get an extension on those permits, which is just a matter of a filing fee while we continue to grant write and cobble together the funds to construct the project. There's more detail on this that we could go into, but again, in the name of time, I'll probably keep cruising. Does anyone want to ask questions about the Lakeshore project?
Has parking been considered for this? Because during the summer months, I have a feeling it's going to be lots of people using this, and I don't know if there's enough parking on Lakeshore for that.
Yeah, good question. So the community center had that same concern after consulting with them. We've identified a few solutions. One is just signage, making sure that private lots, especially the community center lot, is protected for their own use and it won't be encroached upon. But we do anticipate that there will probably be additional parking needed. And if you're familiar with that area, there's a gravel area between the Red Fox Motel's sort of picnic area and then the actual Lakeshore Trail. And that's public right of way, so it's city property. And the tentative plan at this point would be to create parking in that area, to pave that area and to utilize it for parking.
Okay, thank you.
So projects still remaining that we haven't really started at all for the most part. Oh, excuse me. This one's mostly done. It is done, but the only piece that's still missing is to sell the property and to make a complete exit. This is another project that was, I shouldn't say another, but it was a little bit outside the typical norms of urban renewal. But for those that were on council at that time, you remember that we talked about it and we weighed the costs and benefits and risks and decided to go ahead and move forward with the project. I've detailed out some of the costs there, which align fairly well with what we projected at the beginning of the project. The total costs, as often happens, creeped higher than we had forecasted. For better or worse, the sale of this property has been delayed due to the pandemic and the potential purchaser, tenant purchaser, their ability to purchase. And so we've collected more rent than we had originally forecasted. And so some of those overages that we spent on the front end have been made up for in terms of rent revenue. So when we started out on this project, we thought we might have up to $100,000 in subsidy. In other words, that at the end, when we sold it, we would have put in X, and that what we got out of it would be, 100 X minus 100. But it looks like at this point, as long as we collect another year of rent, which is what's expected, we'll end up with a subsidy much less than what we thought we might be at the beginning. So that feels good. Again, just by way of review, that Yotreat's tenant has a right of first refusal to purchase the property. And so whenever we put out public notice that it's for sale, they will have that right to exercise within, I can't remember what period of time is in the lease agreement. At the time that we started this project, we felt like the best possible outcome would be an owner-occupied building rather than just selling it to some investor. And so we've decided to delay the sale of the building while they go ahead and get back on firm footing post-pandemic and in a good position to qualify for financing and buy. You probably recall this project. I believe it was this council that approved it. When we fielded that application, it was anticipated that the renovation was going to be a pretty straightforward process, but as the Ant Farm folks have gotten into it, they've realized it's going to be a little bit more involved. And so they're procuring the services of a design professional in order to get certain components of the building engineered so that they're safe and so that they can be permitted and inspected. So the grant committee committed $63,006 toward that project. It's still committed. They have until June 30th of 2022 to complete the project, and they expect they will. It's just, of course, taking much longer than they thought. Okay, our most recent grant award, 344 Main, on track. I've noted the grant amount there, which was the biggest we've funded to date, but this is certainly the most high impact project we've ever considered. 6 apartments and 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor fronting to Main. The estimated project value is about 1.4 million. So when we were looking at that ratio earlier of private to public dollars invested, without this project, the ratio is more like 2 to 1. And then this project really pushes us to like 3.5 to 1. If you've driven by, you've probably seen our sign out on the fence, and the footings have been poured, and I believe stem walls as well. Some of the subterranean plumbing is in place, so it's tracking pretty well. They're getting as much done before it becomes just a complete slop out there. And then for your consideration tonight, something that's not just an update, but also something staff is looking for guidance on. The renovation, or I guess enhancement of Main Street, right outside the doors here. The urban renewal plan calls for improvements to Broadway, which of course is complete, to Main Street, and to 2nd Avenue as the main sort of arterials for downtown. 2nd Avenue running from the grocery store out to Highway 224 near Old Mill. At this point, $6.6 million is worth less in 2021 than it was in 2007. And so the reality is that everything that's on the menu in the urban renewal plan and these other documents, it's just the dollars are not going to stretch far enough. And so 2nd Avenue has effectively been scratched off the list, and the Main Street project is what still remains. It was identified in all of these documents as a priority project together with Broadway, and it was always intended that the Broadway improvements would be followed by improvements to Main. not necessarily to the same level of finishes. You know, Broadway is, for lack of a better word, quite fancy. Main Street would also be dressed up. The power lines would be put underground. Where the sidewalks need to be replaced, they would be replaced. Some new lighting would be introduced that has that historic feel similar to Broadway. Benches, plantings, etc. So it would be dressed up, but just, you know, a few increments below, I guess, what the finishes are on Broadway. Right now, the cost estimate that we're working with is roughly $2 million from basically Jeremy Lovelace Avenue to 3rd Avenue. And so what I'm seeking some direction on tonight, or maybe not direction as much as confirmation. So in these adopted documents of the city, this has already been identified as a high priority project. So theoretically, staff can sort of continue to just do the work of putting this plan into execution phase. But given that I expressed earlier, some projects make the cut and some don't, because $6.6 million doesn't stretch all the way to do everything that's in these plans. So I'm seeking confirmation tonight that the direction the council still would like to go is to complete the Main Street project, to continue granting, to funding our grant programs, and to investing the $300,000 into the Lakeshore project. If that path is continued, then we expect that there will be roughly $500,000 remaining of maximum indebtedness for some other project before the sunset date in 27. Yes, Councilor Litke.
Before, you know, I would think we should continue. I think it's a good idea if we have a presentation on what the full Main Street project includes, so that we're aware of what we're saying to move forward with again, because that was something that you said was an original document there. I believe you said before this council was put in place. So
Right.
I don't even know everything that was planned for Main Street. I'd really like to kind of have a refreshing on there to make sure, because my concern is that we're going to have the same disaster fiasco of the, like we did the thinning up here on 6th and Main. That's caused a lot of problems for traffic because we have a lot of big trucks that come through here and buses and stuff. And if that same thinning is planned for down here, that might be an issue, because this is a main thoroughfare for big trucks to go through. And if we're going to thin the entire street, that's going to cause a lot more problems. And so that would be a concern I'd want to address.
Yeah.
And get some community input on before we move forward.
So yes, absolutely. There's going to be probably multiple public opportunities for consideration of probably at least 2, but possibly more design alternatives that will be informed by just good engineering, but also things like you're expressing as potential concerns. And so tonight, we're not really signing, I'm not asking you to sign a $2 million check. Rather, I'm just looking for your consensus, I guess, to go ahead and continue with the next steps, which would include the creation of those design alternatives, which would include the public outreach, which would include that fully vetted process.
Okay.
Councilor Dunsmere.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to when we started with Wade Creek Phase 3, and we had a survey go out to the residents asking them what elements are most important to you when considering Phase 3 of Wade Creek Park, and then using those surveys, develop some ideas of what might be implemented into the park, and then hosted open houses to have people from the public come in and give their input on different designs, different features. And then at the end, based on all of the surveys and all of the open houses, we ended up with a park design based on lots of public input. It started out with, let's do Wade Creek Phase 3. Here are all of our ideas. Can the public narrow them down? And then once we've narrowed it down, we implemented the plan. If we did something similar to Maine, I would really like that. Even if it's going to the public and saying, hey, you know, here's all the different things that we could do to improve Main Street. I personally have heard a lot of people sort of griping about the fact that even years after we updated Broadway, we still haven't touched Main and really haven't done a lot over there. But from what I hear and what I see in the public, that is, people do want to see some level of improvement made to Main Street. So that's just my 2 cents of it. And if we went the route of surveys and open houses, very similar to the way we did with the Wade Creek Phase 3. I think that the people would be excited for that opportunity to give that input and excited to see the improvements that they find most important and most valuable to the community. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree as well too. From somebody that has a business on Main Street, I know myself and other businesses as well, we've been looking forward to street and sidewalk improvements. And it's been talked about as well too. So I know many people are looking forward to it and counting on that happening at some point. So if you're looking for, shall staff proceed basically with what you've been doing, which is just carrying forward and trying to put pieces in place. Yeah, my 2 cents would be yes.
Yeah, so this is all helpful, and I just want to confirm again that before a design is selected, there will be lots of outreach and lots of opportunities for the council to participate in that input process. And certainly before we would go to construction, you have to approve any sort of expenditure that even comes near that price tag. So there are definitely many more opportunities to tap the brakes or to change and pivot as needed. This is basically, again, just looking for confirmation that we want to continue on this path and prioritize Main ahead of, say, Second Avenue, or reserving those funds for some other thing that's on the menu, which I've listed out as alternatives on page 4 and 5 of the staff report. Councilor Lickey.
And yeah, I do agree with kind of what the Councilor Dunsmere is saying about getting that input. I'd really like to see if the proceeding to the next step would be kind of some sort of plan laid out on how we were going to interact with the community to get that input, what kind of surveys and the timelines and stuff like that we'd be looking at. I would say if we're going to proceed forward, that would probably be our next step. Would you agree?
Yeah.
With some sort of plan on what that's going to be?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can define that.
Okay. So we'll just note that, I guess, maybe in the minutes for the record, that the next step you'd like to see is sort of a timeline and a sequence of steps that are proposed to be taken to advance the project.
Yeah.
Sounds like, especially in the way of community engagement, I'd like to see a timeline personally of when we want to contact and in what method we want to contact the public and get their input on this project. But I don't think that we should put a kibosh on Main Street at all. I think we should
Yeah.
see at least some level of improvement to Main Street. Whatever that level is, I think should be dictated by the public. And I'd like to see a timeline of how we plan to engage with them.
Okay. Yeah, that all sounds great and definitely in line with what I was expecting tonight. The only asterisk I guess I'll put on that is that, we're going to try and to some degree reverse engineer the project in order to meet budgetary parameters. So I definitely think we should do public outreach and seek input for what features should be included and not included. There's just potential to, of course, get requests for the Taj Mahal when we can't build the Taj Mahal. So
Well, yeah, and I think it's a good idea to let the community even request the Taj Mahal, and then we see what we can do up to our budgetary at that point.
sure.
If they want to request a Taj Mahal and request flying cars and on there, let them request it. I may not get it, but let's see what they have to say about it. Let's
Yeah.
try not to limit what their ideas are, because they may have something
Yeah.
that may pique all of our interest to try to put out there. It's a really good idea for Maine that we haven't thought of, but it may take up most of our budget.
Sure.
So.
Sounds good. Okay. I think that's a good segue then, I guess, in thinking about priorities for urban renewal moving into the future. I'll probably shift from this report then and go to the next. All right. So again, I just want to tee this grant application up with some context. I feel like that's always helpful for decision making. Although I'm not seeking a final decision on this matter either tonight. Again, just sort of confirmation and consensus that we want to continue moving in this direction. So we have 2 grant programs right now, a large grant program and a small. You can see on the screen the different sort of parameters for each program. We've talked about this before, but you may notice if you look at that for a second, that there's kind of a gap in the middle. If you had a project, for example, that was worth $35,000 and you were hoping to get it 50% funded, it wouldn't really fit into these very well. You'd have to be satisfied with a maximum grant under the small program of 10,000, or you'd have to sort of elevate the scope of your project and I guess go bigger and fit into the large grant program. And when we put these programs in place, that was intentional. We still wanted to do the smaller incremental projects, but really reserve urban renewal funds for high impact projects that are not only going to move the needle in terms of visual impact, community impact, but again, thinking of urban renewal's goal to build the tax base, what's going to actually add assessed value to the tax rolls as well. Again, there's a requirement on the large grant program that it's going to have that impact that I just described, but both programs require the project to meet some other basic requirements. They don't have to check all of these boxes, but certainly should check at least one. These are the type of things that we're looking to invest in with the grant programs. So we have received a large grant application from Michael Kerr, who's with us tonight. The project is, I would say, similar in some ways to the project that we were just looking at before, just a few buildings down on Main Street, but maybe slightly smaller in scope. Right now, the hard construction costs are estimated there at about $440,000. There are land costs as well as potentially design A&E, that's architecture and engineering, and then of course city fees also would be part of that equation. So the proposal that we have so far is very conceptual, and that's okay at this stage. We wanted to get it in front of you early to just gauge interest before we used more staff time and more of the applicant's time in preparing a more full and detailed application. Mr. Kerr's proposal is to demolish the existing building and construct a new mixed-use building, which we saw here. I guess I'll come back to it in a moment. With potentially 3 apartments above. We're talking right now about whether or not that's going to be possible with parking constraints and square footage constraints. But 1,800 square foot of commercial space on the ground floor, which would most likely be the home to Mr. Kerr's own business. So a few comments that are included in the staff report, but that I want to walk through here. In terms of urban renewal goals, this checks a lot of boxes, just as the other Main Street project did. It's adding downtown living, it's bringing on new commercial space, it's adding to the tax rolls. There are pedestrian amenities here. It will replace a building which has probably lived out its full life. And so there's just a lot of things as far as urban renewal goes that just make a lot of sense here. That said, there are a few things that I just kind of want to bring to the forefront and make sure that they're on your radar and on the applicant's radar to keep everyone on the same page. Right now, the plans are conceptual. They basically include only what you've seen on this screen. So not, fully engineered or ready to permit yet, but that is something that would definitely be required before we would commit to a grant, as well as before the building department would issue permits. We want that for obvious reasons, but we also want that so that we don't end up with a situation where we're working off cost estimates that are inaccurate. When you have such a conceptual design, it may be easy to omit line items, for example, but with greater detail, a general contractor can literally go item by item, trade by trade, and bid a project appropriately. I did reference the ant farm project there, and I don't mean to disparage them in any way, but that's a similar situation we're trying to avoid, where it just drags on interminably because there wasn't maybe enough front end thought committed to what it would actually take to complete the project. The applicant has submitted the drawings that you see for design review approval, and they're quite close, but there are a few items that still remain to be solved for. We may be short a parking space. We may need some more window square footage on the top floor and a couple other miscellaneous items. So we're close, but still off on that piece. So the question before you tonight is basically, has two components. Are we sufficiently interested in this project to, again, like I said, commit more staff time and more of the applicant's time to preparing a full application? And I'll describe what that should mean in staff's view in just a moment. And do you still want to maintain this overarching priority of funding grant programs? Again, because that means that something else on the menu doesn't get ordered. So, again, I'll reference this finance plan document. I have it up on the screen here, not really because I expect you to be able to read that, but just so you recognize it in your packet materials. The grant request that's been made is for $180,000. That's roughly a third of the project costs, give or take, because those numbers are very squishy at this point. The other Main Street project is funded at about 21% of project costs. That would include all of the things I listed before: land, A&E, hard construction, et cetera. One other point that I just made there is that theoretically, with each new investment in a commercial district, the need for a subsidy should technically go down incrementally each time. That's theory, not practice, but just something to consider. Each year, according to this finance plan, we've allocated roughly $120,000 toward grants all the way through fiscal year 26. This fiscal year that we're in now, we have already committed $63,600 to the Ant Farm project. That doesn't mean that we couldn't fund an amount greater than the difference between 120 and 63,600. I'm not great at mental math. It would just mean that probably it would need to be funded partially in this fiscal year and partially in the next, if that's the route you decided you wanted to go. With the Heritage Project, a few buildings down, we discussed in that meeting that because of the grant amount, it would probably mean shortening the period of time that we could offer grants for. In this situation, I don't think we're going to need to shorten it further. Of course, that depends on how generous you all are with your grant award. But at this point, on a percentage basis, based on the numbers we're working with now, I don't think that this grant would mean shortening the period of time that we offer grants. But again, just making that note that funding grants means not funding something else. So again, those two questions, and I guess I would invite a discussion on those two questions, and then depending on how that discussion goes, we can finish off with these remaining bullet points and wrap up for this portion of tonight.
Sure.
So
Well, I can appreciate this. I have a question, though. Maybe the applicant himself could kind of address us right now on his, how do I put this, his interest in this project. And I want to find out what he's at with this project as it states up there and kind of get an idea and a feel for that before we go into questions. If that's okay.
The question was where we are in the project?
How do you feel about this project? Are you, 100% invested? You're gonna, this
yeah.
is something you really want to do and you've got it all in place.
Great
And
question.
us signing on to this means, hey, you're there.
We just had this discussion right before the meeting. And actually we, even over the last hour, spoke with Heath, the developer at the previous project, and we feel very, even more confident, renewed determination. You might know my house is right up in the corner across from Granny's and 6th and Broadway. And so we using kind of the same template and contractors that we have there. Hopefully it gives a little bit more understanding of what we do and how I would like to work on this project. You may also see we actually at this point own the project. So I'm completely committed at this point. I mean, I own the building. So we need to follow through with that. So I guess I could say, after talking to my general contractor tonight, we have a renewed determination that this is really what we want to do. I really need a place for my business to be, which is currently across the street in the first floor. And this is a perfect location for what we do, Amazon and online sales.
Okay, great.
So
Well, thank you for that.
And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, what is your business again?
we sell just a bunch of electronics on Amazon and eBay and on online sales.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now, some other questions here that we can kind of add in
Yeah,
here.
I think you were first.
And I'm just clarifying it, at least for Matt here, and thanks for your answers.
Yeah.
But tonight, we're not talking about, are we approving a grant? Tonight, we are talking about, are we interested as an urban renewal agency continuing to fund maybe various grants throughout the rest of this year and next in order to allow you guys not to spin your wheels on something that we may not be interested in? Is that right?
That's right. And to just also, I guess, gain the support of this board for the items that I feel like should comprise a full application.
Okay, so again, so then what we're looking at here is, from my standpoint, I mean, this, like you said, this meets the check marks. This improves a business or a location in the downtown, improves the overall look at downtown, brings residents downtown, brings another business into the downtown area. So from my standpoint, it seems like a great fit for Estacada and what we're doing here.
Yeah, and I don't disagree, and I don't raise the question, and by raising the question, I don't mean to communicate any disagreement either, just wanting to make sure that I'm not going rogue on you and fielding applications for projects that you may not be interested in.
Okay, Joel, go ahead.
Couple things. First, I have a question for you.
Sure.
If you don't get a grant from us, are you still going through this project all the way to the end?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess the biggest consideration on that, I guess, is some of the improvements we're making with pedestrian and maybe design considerations. I think that's where it came out to me where it would be appropriate to ask for a grant, which would really benefit all the desires of the Urban Renewal Grant panel. I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, I do need a place for my business, and I'm going to build a building there. I'm committed to build something there, but I would like to, if we really can work together to make this exactly what Estacada needs in its living room, if that's what Main Street is.
So to clarify,
Mhm.
if you don't get a grant from us, you're going to change the design a little bit and do less pedestrian changes. But if you have a grant, you'd be doing more pedestrian changes. Is that kind of what I heard?
I think that's the understanding of what the
Based
grant
upon requirements of the
yeah,
grant.
it's to make it more appealing to Estacada's goals. Sure.
Okay. And so we have about $3.06 million remaining in our budget. We estimate our project cost for Main Street is about $2 million, right? So that leaves about $1.06 million for the next 6 years roughly, or 5.5 years for all projects.
Correct.
And we're averaging about $200,000 to $250,000 in grants per year, roughly on our projects, correct? Based on what I've been seeing.
If we averaged out the grant awards that we've been making, it would be a lot less than 250 per year. If we look at just the recent past, we've had higher grant requests and fewer grant requests. And so it's hard to, yeah, I mean, if we talk in the aggregate, then it might not be accurate, but if we talk about just the past year and a half, it's not going to be accurate either. So.
And we also have the 300,000 for Lakeshore coming out of there, so you don't have the whole.
So we only have about 700,000. So we have about 700,000 to spread over 5.5 years, which is about $150,000 a year, roughly, give or take.
Yeah,
So-
we're gonna make about $300,000 on the sale of the Treats building, which
So
would
that
also.
might offset that, assuming when the sale goes through. I'm just trying to figure out what we have, what we can break down over the next 5 years. And my thought is that we're starting to get to the point where we're pre-committing for projects ahead of ourselves. And that's gonna maybe push out some good projects in the end. And so what I'm trying to do is, I would like to see us catch up a little bit with our commitments into the actual fiscal year, because we've already pre-committed $63,000 off of this fiscal year from last year. So we're basically starting to get our feet ahead of us before we're pre-committing, and that we may be shooting ourselves in the foot with projects that are coming up too. So what I'm not saying not to fund the project, but what I'm saying is we need to look at the timing and how we're committing ourselves in money going forward, because we could miss out on a large project. Like there may be one coming up where they want to redo the motel down the street that's come up before, and they may want to fix that all up, but we may be out of money to commit toward the project of that because we've got our feet ahead of us. So I'm kind of curious to see if we can catch up with ourselves and the fiscal year to see the projects that might still be coming in. That's all. I'm just worried about we're getting too far ahead of ourselves.
I guess I think you're exactly right. This document basically attempts to do exactly what you're describing. The only thing that it leaves open-ended is what that $1 million would be committed to. And I don't know at this point, we necessarily need to make that decision unless you really want to. That's a possibility.
Well, I was just doing some quick math to kind of figure out how we're breaking things down.
Yeah.
And what that would put us out to. And so my thing is, I don't want to commit so far ahead that when we're get too far ahead and we committed all our money, we still have 3 years left and we have good projects coming up that we suddenly can't do because we've pre-committed. I'm trying to get us, I just basically want to slow down a little bit so that we can at least see what projects are coming in that actual fiscal year when we're committing money in that fiscal year, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So, and maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
Councilor Dunsmuir, just 1 second. I think maybe what would be worthwhile then is at a subsequent meeting to maybe go through this in a little bit of detail, not too excruciatingly much detail, but to check this out and then to maybe look at these planning documents and sort of pick from the menu to see which projects bubble to the top as priorities.
And that might be a good way to approach it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Counselor Litke actually gives me a really great segue into what I prepared to bring with me to this particular meeting tonight. I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse because here Katie goes talking about construction excise tax again. I wanted to share with everybody. So since we have committed $250,000 to the Heritage Property Project, which happened in February of this year. So I am looking at all of the single family resident permits that we are updated on once a month, how many SFRs are handed out each month. I went through starting in February and we have numbers updated through September. And between February and September, we have issued 147 single family resident permits, 147 since February. If we had the construction excise tax in place in February, we would have collected over $390,000 at this point for that fund, which if anyone remembers the presentation that I gave back in May of 2019 about how a construction excise tax is legally doled out by the state, they tell us that we can use 50% of that fund for developer incentives, not just affordable housing, because affordable housing is another 35% of that fund. But 50% of that fund could be directed to developer incentives, which this project in my mind would qualify for because you're talking about building apartments, which are really desperately needed in Estacada. We have only approved 6 apartments to be built in Estacada during the time that I have been on council since January of 2019. So to see 3 more approved would make me very happy as an apartment manager myself. I'm just going to throw that out there. That being said, if we had that construction excise tax in place, we wouldn't have to have this conversation at the Urban Renewal Agency. We could actually fund this grant 100% outright just by using the funds that we would have collected from the construction excise tax, taxing single family residents only, not even including a commercial construction excise tax. This is just the single family residents only. Personally, I heard you talking about the Urban Renewal Agency as a tool, and it absolutely is a tool. But I'm wondering if this is the right tool to continue using moving forward when we're talking about multifamily development. Personally, I've been saying it since 2019. And I'm going to continue saying it today. If we had the construction excise tax, we wouldn't have to dip into our URA fund. We could have this complete grant funded today without question and have money left over to fund the next project that comes along.
The Taj Mahal on Main Street.
We could do a lot of things with it. Personally, I said it back in February when this board approved the $250,000 grant to the Heritage Properties Project. I said, we're going to see more multifamily projects coming along asking for this grant money.
Right.
And personally, I want to give it to you because I want to see more apartments in Estacada. I want to see more affordable housing. I want to see diversity in housing. You know, different people need different types of housing at different points in their life. We need to have a place that brand new teachers who are just graduating out of college and want to work in the Estacada School District, we need places for them to live, because getting out of college with all them student debts and, you know, being a brand new elementary school teacher, they're not going to be able to afford the only type of housing that is currently being built in Estacada. So personally, I see the value in this project. I'm just wondering how much longer the URA is going to be the appropriate tool to use to fund projects like this. And I personally would really, really, really like to see this council take a construction excise tax seriously, seeing all of the different projects that we have currently lost out on. I mean, again, if we had the construction excise tax back in 2019, we could have funded the heritage properties out of the same fund. We wouldn't have to come to this board for requests like this. We wouldn't have to dip into our very, very limited funding source. And that's honestly where my opinion is. I want to fund your project. I'm just wondering if the URA is the most appropriate place to do it, or if there is something else that we could talk seriously about and maybe finally passing a construction excise tax in Estacada that might be a more appropriate tool for us to use, especially for projects like this one and ones in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Dunsmere. And thanks for coming tonight and sharing your hopes and dreams of a new business. I really like this idea, by the way. I think this would work nicely in our community, and I think it's something our community needs. I'm just not sure about granting all that money. I'm kind of hesitant to throw all my eggs in one basket. So sort of like what you were saying, I would really like to just crunch the numbers a bit more. That sheet that you had pulled out, maybe go over those a bit more. And so I can have a better understanding as to how those funds are allocated and things like that. And possibly look into alternative means in funding this project so it can happen with, with minimal, loss to the grant that we now have. So those are my thoughts, but I really do like the project.
Thanks.
I think it'd be good for our community.
So before we wrap up tonight, I guess I hear what you're saying. I still need some direction as far as these specific questions go. And I guess I'll speak real quickly to what Councilor Litke was saying. Would you do this project if you didn't get a grant? It's a good question. Ideally, when you grant fund projects, you want to grant fund those projects that pass the but-for test. The but-for test says we wouldn't have done this project but for the grant we received. That's difficult to sometimes tease out and to know whether or not we are funding but-for projects or not. But one way we can try and get at that, and that we did with the Heritage Project, is to ask them to produce an operating pro forma that looks 10 years into the future of this project and demonstrate to us that there is a legitimate financial need in order to make the project pencil. If we don't have that, then we could fund at $5,000 or at $500,000, and we'd have no way of knowing if we made an appropriate grant amount or not. So that's one of the things on the list that if you did want to continue considering this application, I'd highly recommend that we look at the next time we review this. Councilor Litke.
All right, so I do want to be clear. I do like the project, and me asking the questions and not saying that I want to just not go forward with it. I just want other questions answered so that we're doing our due diligence as being stewards of the taxpayers' money, that we're making sure that we're putting money in the right spot. And being the fact you are on Main Street, we are talking about redoing Main Street. We'd also want to make sure your project lines up with what our plans are for Main Street. Because if you do a bunch of work on the Main Street area for pedestrians, we come up with a whole different plan, and all that money's been wasted. And so that's also something to consider as well. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. I think that before we can make an actual educated decision on it, this is something we should be funding right away or not, or if there should be more design integration. So pro forma is great, but we still have other questions we need to answer before we can even get to that, I think, especially any projects on Main Street. So like I said, I want to see us not get our feet ahead of us without making sure that we're keeping our foundation there as well. We need to look at these numbers like Councilor Hughes had said, and we need to crunch through them and take a good look at them. But we also need to look at the projects and what our plans are going to be for Main Street. So that way he's not wasting money, we're not wasting money, and we're all kind of lining up and kind of syncing together on that. I think it's some things we need to prioritize and put some meetings on the schedule in the near future to actually discuss those and get those out of the way so that all our projects that are going to be coming down the line on Main Street can actually line up well. So.
Okay, Jerry?
So back to the original question that was asked. Yes, Matt, my opinion, this project or this program, the program
Jerry, we
is
can't hear you.
how about now?
You're looking for a figure.
I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me now?
Oh, I hear something.
I guess my headphones aren't working.
There you go. It talked really loud because it's a very small speaker.
Okay, so back to the original question. This program is a very good program, and I would like to see it continue, in my personal opinion. I know that you weren't asking for an approval on this particular project tonight, but the program should continue. I do like the program. I think it's been very beneficial to Estacada, and I would like to see this program continue.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. All right. Well, Matt, you've heard the agency.
Okay,
What
so-
exactly can we do at this point?
It sounds like, and I guess I'll recap to make sure I've understood, the next step would be to, what have I done with my magic paper? To plan a meeting where we talk about this
That sounds like this.
and to
Yeah.
put this project in the context of this.
Yeah.
And then maybe address the question of whether or not we continue considering this project. Is that the way you'd like to move forward?
I think that sounds appropriate.
Okay, yep.
Also to talk about Main Street, because we need to answer those questions, not just the money part, but what needs to happen on Main Street too, because if people come up with some ideas on there and they're not fitting into what his design is, then they're not gonna match, and it's gonna cause a problem there. So
Yeah.
we need some questions answered before we can get back to him if it's.
I think that's good thinking. At the same time, the improvements that Mr. Kerr would be completing would be on private property, even though they would be pedestrian amenities. We're talking about things like awnings that go over the top of where people walk. We're talking about planters near entrances, lighting. Those are pedestrian amenities. He wouldn't really be doing work in the public right of way, which is what
Okay,
our
so
project would
he
do.
wouldn't be redoing any of the sidewalks or lighting, anything like that.
Potentially sidewalks if the engineer requires it during construction. Is that fair, Denise?
Yeah, the sidewalks have already been done in front of the building. We probably will have to redo Fourth Street sidewalks.
That'd be out of the Main Street project scope. Okay, yeah, my concern would be on Main Street. Like I said, I'm trying to avoid us having to do rework, like, for example, when ODOT had their genius idea to tear out all the brand new sidewalks we just put out here on 224, and put those new designs in and waste all that taxpayer money. I just want to see that happen over here. That's all. or, you know, of his personal money, so. I'm just trying to making sure that we're putting those thought forward. So, and I know that might delay a response to Mr. Kerr over here, but at the same time, I think he's on board with not having that information ahead of time too. So,
Yeah, so I think we're on the same page. We'll continue this conversation. You come back to us with that and this project and maybe a little information on Main Street. I know it's hard to bring Main Street back into this yet.
Yeah.
I don't think we're there, but yeah, so that's where we want to go with this direction.
I guess we can adjourn, but Denise, do we have a meeting that we could hold for this, or would it need to be January? Okay,
Okay,
all right.
any board member comments?
Matt, really quick, when we come up with the next meeting and we're talking about the numbers and Main Street and all that stuff, can we talk about the history of how we did Broadway? Maybe some before and after pictures would be helpful for certain members of this board.
Sure, yeah, just kind of a project history and evolution over there.
Absolutely.
That predates me too, so I'll have to, yeah, do some
Dig into
asking
the
around. but-
archives.
yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to make a comment? Any board comment? No? Okay, seeing that, I'm going to adjourn the agency meeting and